SaaS Backwards is sponsored by Austin Lawrence Group, specializing in demand gen for SaaS. It sure is noisy. I deleted 100 emails from vendors just this morning. Your buyer has gotten better at ignoring you, and you're gonna need a big idea if you want to cut through all that clutter. Austin Lawrence is just the right agency to help you find it. So if your campaigns are falling on deaf eyeballs, let's talk. Visit austinlawrence.com today and let's build something bigger.
Welcome to the SaaS Backwards podcast, where we reverse engineer the success of fast-growing SaaS firms and explore strategies CMOs and CEOs are using to drive their businesses forward.
Welcome to SaaS Backwards, a podcast that helps SaaS CMOs and CEOs to accelerate growth and enhance profitability. Our guest today is Steve Benson, CEO and founder at Badger Maps, the #1 route planner for field sales, a SaaS that helps you optimize sales routes and sell more. Hey, Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Kenneth, thanks a lot for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I think we're going to have a great time, so I'm happy to have you on the podcast as well. Before we get too deep into it, can you tell us just a little bit more about yourself, your background, and Badger Maps?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my background, I grew up in Chicago. I've lived in California for about 20 years. And then I recently moved to Utah because this is where Badger's biggest offices are. So that's me personally. Well, I guess what Badger does, as you mentioned, is it helps field sales teams build routes, visualize all their customers in a map, and have access to all their information in a map-based environment on their mobile device and connected to their CRM is where their information is. So how did I kind of start down that path and get this thing started in the first place? 11 years ago, I was at Google in the mapping team. And so I was very familiar with what the Google Maps API was capable of, what mapping was going to bring to the mobile ecosystem. And I had a background in sales. And so I understood the problem and I understood pieces of the solution that you would need to solve the problem with that field salespeople have. And so I was able to kind of visualize what a solution would look like. And so started the company in January of 2012.
So you took the knowledge or sort of the context from Google Maps that there was an opportunity to go further in the sales world. But how did you go about figuring out the right product? I think this is a great story, and it's weaving a thread that we've picked up from other entrepreneurs like yourself. So I'd love you to sort of give the before you had a product story.
Okay, yeah. So I think that I really understood the problem, and it's kind of cheating to have experienced the problem yourself. Not everyone has that luxury in the problem they're pursuing. Understanding what it was like to be a field sales person and what their challenges were was obviously really helpful for me in figuring out what to build first. And that's one of the big important questions, because you look at a space and you can kind of say, well, I see 10 things I could improve about it. But what you have to ask yourself is, well, which is the one that's painful enough that it's not a nice to have, but people will pay for it and pay for it now in its most basic form? That's the key question that you have to answer when you're starting to build a product, because 10, 15 years down the road, you've built a ton of stuff, right? You've got your solution is rich and does lots of things, but the first things you do need to be the things that are really solving a key pain point that is painful enough that people are willing to pay to have it solved quickly, or else you need a lot of external investment or money coming from somewhere. If you build a nice to have rather than the need to have that people will actually pay for, you end up, not being in a place where you can monetize very quickly, and you need a lot of investment then.
Yeah, we talk a lot here about pain points because I couldn't agree more. If you're not solving a problem that people are willing to pay money to fix, even a mature product can struggle in market. You end up with this malaise of product market fit, right? Oh, we don't have good product market fit. We got to go back to the well. So I think getting the problem figured out, the earlier, the better, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great advice.
So tell me how you validated what you thought might be the right business to be in.
Well, it's funny. I had about 5 things I wanted to do starting out, and I explored each one of them. And the initial thing I did, and at first, all this was in a browser. It wasn't on the mobile. The mobile devices weren't strong enough to host this you couldn't run an app like this at that point. I mean, this is back in the day of BlackBerries, right? The iPhone just wasn't strong enough. I guess it was really the key thing to figuring out what do you build is focusing in on the potential end user. And so for all 5 of those ideas, I fleshed them out a bit to make sure I wasn't missing something. But I ended up going with the one that I liked the best, probably partially because of biases and partially because I knew it the best and I was able to flesh it out the best. But the key was really talking to a lot of people that experience the problem and would be the decision maker to get the problem solved in an organization. So for me, that's sales operations people, sales leadership, from VP level down to frontline management, and the end users of the product, which, the end users are the leaders of field sales teams and also the actual field sales team who's in the field. And so talking with all those folks and really fleshing out their needs. And you got to ask the question like, hey, do you think this is cool? Like, here's what I'm thinking about doing. Because no one's going to tell you your baby's ugly, right? But if you have to ask the question, like, would you pay this much money a month to have this problem solved with a thing that looks like this? Here's the sketch of it. And you want people to be like, yeah, of course, that problem's worth 10 times more than that or 20 times more than that. And if you're not asking them to pay, you don't necessarily get that answer, and you can find yourself building a nice to have. Whereas if you get that answer and you want to get it 100 times before you bother building something, because it's a whole lot cheaper to talk to 100 people than it is to build a product, right? So if you've gotten that answer, like, yeah, of course I would buy. That's a huge problem for me 100 times, then you can then be like, great, well, it's going to take me 6 months, a year to build this out to this basic level to solve this basic problem. I'm going to solve a lot of problems after that, but you'd buy this thing if I build it? And you would be like, for this price? Yes. Okay. Then you can circle back to them 8 months later and say, hey, thing's almost built. I want you to take a look at it. Give me any feedback you have, make sure I'm on the right path here, on the right track, check out what I've done. And then hopefully they're nodding their heads during that meeting saying, yeah, this solves a huge annoyance for me, huge problem. This is going to save me 10 times as much money as you're talking about charging. Really, in all honesty, your product's too cheap is what you want to be hearing all the time. and if I'm going to be candid, you're not charging enough money. But that's the price point at which you'll be able to sell a lot of it a lot of the time. Sometimes you can charge more, but I would say get it in people's hands for a reasonable price early on and think about raising prices on new people, not your existing people later.
So this is sort of an integration then of your product research and your early sales. Kind of an interesting point to eliminate, right?
Yeah, they go together. And it's so important that someone with power in your organization is talking to people, right? Is the one that's getting on the phone, someone who has the ability to guide the product's direction. You can't really hire your first salesperson or business development person. Like, it's got to be someone with power in the company. You have to give them power in the company, equity in the company. They have to be a leader at the company. I think, because it's very easy for the product or engineering team in these early stage startups to be 5 degrees off in what the thing is that they're creating. But after you sail in a direction for, 8 months, 5 degrees adds up and you're pretty far off from what the market wanted. You need someone who's really engaging with the people that are going to use the product, who has a voice in the organization. And, that's not something I knew going into this. It was just luck that, the person that was talking to the customers was me. And also I had a lot of power as the founder of the company. But that's a mistake I've seen a lot of people make, is building something a little off because, they hired their first 2 salespeople or a biz dev person, and that person wasn't listened to enough, or didn't have kind of the feel for product that they would have needed to help guide the direction of the product team and the engineering team we're actually building.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I certainly think that founders need to be involved in product management in the early days because it's their vision. And what we've kind of elaborated here first time on the podcast, for me anyway, is that you can justify the investment in time to make those calls, not only in the product direction, but tie that to your future year, 18-month out goal to have some pipeline. So those conversations, every one of them actually has value, even beyond. Once you even have product management pretty well buttoned up, you might want to keep doing those calls to keep building your pipeline, right? And make sure also the market isn't moving away from you.
And it's a good excuse to talk to a lot of people. It's a great lead gen strategy when you're early. And I think it's authentic and you get some surprises out of people, right? You may just bump your head into a niche of, oh, really? So for us, it was med device companies, selling to doctors. We figured out that, and we'll sell to doctors, selling to dentists, selling to chiropractors, selling to anybody. Like, of that nature, we found these device companies were a really good fit. They weren't regulated like the drug companies were, so they could actually move and make decisions quickly. And they had big field sales teams. When we were only 2 years into the company, we did our first six-figure deal. Well, I think $312,000 deal.
Wow.
Because they bought for 3 years up front. But we had a very basic product at that point. But it was just because we met them throughout this process, just cold reach out over LinkedIn, like, hey, here's what we're building. Is this interesting? And it was to a salesperson on their team. And that salesperson became a sales trainer over those 2 years and kind of had a voice in the organization. And it was just one of these situations where, because we had listened to their needs, we had really created something that they needed. And they were like, oh, well, we want to buy this for everybody. This solves a very direct problem for us.
Hey, I want to transition to a related topic, but I want to move off the very early days. But we kind of turn the attention to founder-led selling. And your point of view of the role of founders in young company sales and maybe not so young companies. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I'm a big proponent of founder-led selling. I mean, obviously, I'm a biased voice on this because I'm a founder who's a salesperson at heart, really. So I think it's really important. But I mean,
validating yourself here.
Self-validation, right? I think, the most important part of founder-led selling is the stuff that I was talking about. Having the voice at the table with the product and eng team early on. It needs to be a founder or someone with a lot of power in the organization, because, when the product or engineering team starts drifting away from what the customer wanted, and sometimes that happens, right? If they don't build the features in the right order, there are so many problems to solve. It's easy to solve one that's a nice to have or not the one that they pay for, that sort of thing. So that stuff that I talk to is the most important reason for founder-led selling, I think. And this is a debate, right? I mean, and someone who invests in lots of companies or is probably a better person to speak to than I am. And I also have biases here, but I think that it's really useful. I wouldn't say it's necessary, obviously, but it's really useful if the CEO has some sales chops. And sales isn't like magic. Anyone can develop their sales skills, I think. You don't have to be a charismatic unicorn with purple eyes to sell stuff, right? Sorry, I've been reading too many children's books lately. It's my baby.
That's a good one. Well,
unicorns with purple eyes.
That'll be my Halloween costume. The sales leader is a unicorn.
But, it's about just listening to the customer and understanding how to outreach. And outreach isn't crazy, reach out to the exact person that you think is going to be the one buying this on the phone or over LinkedIn or over email, and let them know very succinctly, hey, starting a thing, this is what it's doing. I think it's for you. I would love to get your feedback. Having the person running the company or number two in the company, having that ability is a real asset to a business. You don't need it, but it's a real asset.
As the company matures, is there still an important place for founder sales?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say next. I think not necessarily the founder, but the CEO should always be involved in sales and involved with existing customers and involved in customer problems. Like just earlier today, I was on the phone speaking with a customer, and even though there's 4 levels of people in between who they're dealing with normally and me, I think people want to speak to power. The customer wants to speak to power every once in a while. If they have a problem, if they have a question, if they need to see the vision, it's important to bring in the CEO as a sales tool, as executive air cover, and just to communicate and let a customer know that they're important. And it's important for the CEO to hear directly from the horse's mouth what the customer feels, what they think, what's important to them. And I forget who told me this story, but someone was telling a story about how they ran into Benioff in another city. It was Chicago or Atlanta. They were in a big company, and they bumped into Benioff in the hallway, and they were a smaller company. This is a couple of years ago, right before COVID. And, it's just one of these things where even at $100 billion a year, that guy is still showing up to the important customers, and he's still getting on planes. I mean, it's a private plane. It's probably has some, chocolate dipped strawberries on it or something, but he still got on a plane, flew to a city in the middle of the country and met with a customer. And this guy, it was a funny story because this guy had worked for Benioff. Benioff was his boss's boss years before. And he's bumping him into it. They're both going toe to toe to win this customer now. So I think it's instructive that it's important, even when your company is at scale and public, you're still selling, you're still in front of customers, you're still interacting. So certainly at, 10 million in ARR, you certainly are as well.
Fair enough. Hey, let's change topics again. I wanted to dig in with you on the financial underpinnings of the young company. And, scaling up, you need money. And I guess you have sort of three or four choices. You can spend your own cash if you have money in the bank. You can raise funds from others. You can completely bootstrap, and you can seek debt. And I think you have a strong opinion on the use of debt versus VC money that might benefit people who haven't thought about this as a path to scale up finances.
Yeah, for us, debt was a great tool. There's pros and cons with debt and equity. And not everyone has a business that is monetizable as quickly as ours was. There's a lot of problems that need a lot of money dumped in them to achieve the scale. And if it's a problem that you need 40 engineers working on for 2 years before it's going to be anywhere, then you have to sell equity to do that, right? We were starting to monetize probably like 10-ish months into the company, like not a lot, small deals, but we were selling software that quickly. And there were only 4 people at the company. We were very lean. And we did have some money coming into it. I was able to make some money at Google that I could light on fire for a startup. And so we had some money floating around, enough to pay the salaries of the 3 people. And I didn't take a salary. But I mean, you're effectively paying yourself that way too. You're just not, running it through the company. Your bank account's paying for your peanut butter directly, right? There's just no middleman. So yeah, I think money has to be there in the beginning. Nothing's monetizable from day one except for consulting. Some people are able to bootstrap a software company or a business based on consulting, although that's pretty distracting. I mean, it turns out consulting's hard and customers are demanding, and stuff tends to be harder to do than you think, not easier. So you end up working pretty hard, and I think it's super distracting. So I did sell some equity, friends and family around, but not much, like probably 400 grand. And I probably put in 600 grand or so. And that got us to where the money coming in was covering things. So I guess that's the good thing about equity. You have money from day one, and you can start doing things if they believe in the story. Other VCs really want to see quite a bit of traction before they're going to give you money. $1 million in ARR with this growth rate, great, we want to do an A round with you, that sort of thing. And so you really have to get pretty far down the road. I mean, $1 million in ARR, I mean, that took me 4 years to do that or something. That's not easy. So money needed to have come somewhere before that. And debt has similar problems. No one's going to give you debt unless there is something backing the debt. So either, if you have a house or something, you can obviously get debt against that, but that's, fairly high risk. And if you lose the house, your spouse kills you. But for a business to get debt on its own merit, it has to have revenue, because they kind of give you debt on a ratio basis with how much revenue you're bringing in, at least in the software business. So maybe, this debt provider might provide 0.3 or 0.5 or even 1x your annual revenue as debt. We brought in debt probably when we were around like 300K in ARR. And I think we did like $120,000 in debt, which is, that's still a lot. If you're growing fast, that was 2 extra engineers at the time, right? So it was really meaningful. So why don't we dive into debt and what's good about it, what's bad about it, where the risks are, what to watch out for. Because there's a lot of lessons I learned over the years. And I've probably done like 6 million in debt over the years. And I've used 3 of the main SaaS providers. I've done a deal with Lighter Capital. I've done a deal with ScaleWorks. They're called Element Finance now. And I currently have a deal with Founder Path. So debt thoughts. First one is think about the payback term. So there are some providers out there that have a really short payback term, like Pipe and CapChase. And I guess the thought there is they're like, well, we'll always plus you up again, right? So we're going to give you a year of debt compared to these other guys like Lighter and these other ones that I did, Founder Path and Element. Those are like 4-year deals. So a 1-year deal is way, way riskier. Well, first of all, you're paying it back at a really fast rate. So even if the APR is the same, if you're paying it back over a year instead of 4, obviously you're paying every payment is a lot more.
Are much greater. Demands on
Exactly.
cash.
Yeah. You're paying it back awful fast. And so those are really only good for like bridge loans. Like, oh, I need to be able to make my payroll, and I am not going to be able to make payroll without money. So I need to do a loan. That's what those short-term loans are for. Obviously a lot riskier. And you just got to pay them back so fast. And those guys would say, oh, well, we're just going to keep plussing you up. When you need another loan, you've already paid back a bunch of this one. We'll just give you another loan. And that works great until it doesn't, right? And, obviously this week, Silicon Valley Bank blew up. So bad things can happen in the world of finance. And so they could very easily say, oh, we're not going to plus it up as much. Or, oh, now we're only going to give you this because this happened, the interest rate environment or your business isn't performing, whatever it is. If you were doing, 75% of your ARR loans with a company like that and paying it back over the year, always just keep plussing it up and paying back the debt with other debt, you can really be caught in a pickle because they can say, oh, we're going to give you less. You've got to come up with that cash, right? Whereas A 48-month loan, you can really manage the risk to, right? Like you always want to be able to pay down the debt successfully with nothing else happening. You don't want to rely on more debt to be able to pay it down, or else things get dangerous. Whereas, a 48-month loan, in year 1.5, you've spent the money on an investment, right? Whether that investment is more marketing, more sales, more engineering, whatever it is, that investment should start paying off after that point. And you kind of have a break-even point on that loan after it starts paying off, meaning like, okay, so I invested in 3 more salespeople with this loan. And, by the 18th month, those salespeople were bringing in as much marginal income as we're paying for them. And then from months 18 to 24, now we're in the black on that investment and we're paying back the loan in the first place. In months 24 to 48, we just pay down the investment. We end up way ahead. That's a good investment. Whereas you can't do that with a shorter term. So that's the first point, is terms. Covenants, there can be some nasty covenants. I don't know if everyone knows what a covenant is. A covenant is basically a rule, like, hey, for this loan to be considered in good standing, you have to do this thing. You have to wear a purple shirt on Tuesday. They can say whatever they want, right? Normal covenants are, you have to grow this much, you can't shrink, or you can't shrink more than this much. You have to always keep this much money in the bank. And that's a great one to think about, right? Like if they have a liquidity covenant like that, like we're loaning you $1 million, but you have to always have $500,000 in the bank. It's like, well, then really you just loaned me 500 grand and I'm just paying for $1 million. So covenants like that can make the loan both less useful and also more expensive effectively, because now you only have $500,000 to invest, but you're paying for the $1 million. There can be profitability covenants. Basically, they're creating rules. This lender I spoke with recently, they had a covenant in their terms that said you have to grow 15% a year, or 20% a year. I forget what it was, but it doesn't matter. The covenants can make a loan very risky because you don't want to be in default on a loan ever under any circumstance. And they can say whatever they want. They can change the rate. They can make you pay it all back at once. Basically, you can lose your business over something stupid, right? Like, oh, you have to grow 20% a year. It's like, well, I mean, I grew way more than that last year, but the 2 years before 2020 during COVID, I didn't. So what if there was another event? I kept paying all my debt during COVID. I paid all my employees, but it was a bad time relative, didn't grow as much. I shrunk 8% in 2020. So clearly, there are things outside of my control that could break this covenant, and therefore I can't do business with you. And another thing is like, well, there's kind of a lot of BS ways to talk about debt. Like they'll be like, oh, we're purchasing a contract on your revenue, and so you're going to pay back 110% of the amount that you borrowed. That's not a 10% loan because of the way things amortize, the math works. That's a really, really expensive loan. So you've got to be able to convert. APR, annual percentage rate, is kind of the way to look at all this stuff, apples to apples. Any weird term, any weird way they're presenting the debt, just convert it to APR. And then you can kind of compare anything to anything.
Yeah. So why do you prefer debt financing for your business to venture investing or PE money?
Well, I wouldn't say I prefer it necessarily. I would say it's a lot cheaper if you have revenue. And it really depends, like I said before, about what type of business you are. Do you need a lot of money to solve the problem? Is money a hurdle to solving the problem that then you need a whole bunch of it and lots of engineers working on it for years before the problem's going to be solved? Well, then you need equity investors. But if you're someone sitting at $1 million a year in annual revenue, you can start getting a meaningful loan, maybe a $500,000, $600,000 loan. And given your growth rate, if you can make do with that, if that can supply you with what you need to grow, you haven't lost any of your business. Like a VC round's expensive, right? You're giving up 20% of the business, 25% of the business. And more importantly, you're giving up control. They can fire you. They often want to take the business in a different direction. There's often a misalignment between what VCs want and what founders want, because VCs really want home runs and founders want home runs too. But founders don't always want home runs if it has a low probability of success, because a founder, if they sell a business for $50 million and they own most of the business, obviously you're fine. Whereas selling a business for $50 million that a VC invested in at a $50 million valuation, that is not a win for them. They are not happy with that because of their business model being that a lot of their investments go to zero. They need the winners to really have the potential to win big. And so they may want you to do a riskier business model for a higher reward. They want to do that across 10 businesses, knowing that 8 of them are going to fail. But they're not crazy. It's just their business model. And that's why they paid such a high multiple for your company that only makes $1 million a year, right? That's what they were willing to say. It was worth $20 million when it only makes $1 million and has no profit, right? That's the trade-off. For a lot of people, they're better off raising debt. If you can make do with debt, you want to make do with the debt. If you need equity, you need equity. And then that's kind of an important decision.
Fair enough.
Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Yeah, that's good. What I want people to do is start thinking about things, right? If we can provoke thought with our listeners or bring them one pearl of wisdom they didn't have before, folks like you are pretty sophisticated. If we can give them one good idea, then I think we've done our job.
I don't know if I'm sophisticated or if I just have a lot of scar tissue. It's unclear.
I think that's how you earn it, right? Hey, let's change topics a little bit. You brought this up, that content was an important part of building the reputation of a firm. And obviously, we're in the content marketing business, and we believe that thought leadership drives future demand. But I want to hear your point of view as an entrepreneur who has to make those investments. How do you decide to do that? What made you believe that content and reputation go together and that there's value there?
Yeah, I was doing content marketing before HubSpot was a thing.
Yeah, me too.
I've always been a big believer in it. And, it's a long-term investment. So it sucks to do when you're a small company. I would force myself to write a piece of content at least every other day. I would try to get something out. Or if it was a bigger project, make meaningful progress on it every other day. And so there were a lot of nights when I was awake at 3 a.m. writing some stupid blog about something stupid that was related to what we were doing. But a lot easier with ChatGPT these days, I'll tell you. But I don't think you'll be able to use that. I think Google's going to be smart enough to figure that one out. But it kind of mechanical turking ChatGPT for myself, like writing an article about a topic and coming up with something clever and interesting enough that people would read it and click on it, and then getting it posted in the right places, and having a blog, having a podcast. I mean, these things are all long-term investments, but we've always had great SEO after about a year of this. The key is to keep it specific and create things that are unique and actually create real value, right? And, marketing people have always been a key expense for me. And our marketing team is still mostly content marketers, right? It's really important, I think.
Do you have any empirical or anecdotal evidence that your investment in content has led to revenue?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can track it. I mean, using modern analytics tools, you can see very easily, oh, well, this deal came through here. I mean, we can't tell what they searched on Google. We know that it wasn't our brand, but we know someone searched something on Google that led them to this landing page that we wrote 7 years ago about, this topic. Then, like, if we were at a topic on how to be a great sales manager, or some element of, sales operational management or something like that. And it's kind of tangentially related to what we do. But in that, we bring ourselves up. We toss a little 30-second video about what we do. We have a bunch of ads in there. We have a pop-up about us. The goal is to make people aware of what we do. The ones that are interested are going to click through to the main page and then learn about us, do a little research. The second they sign up for the free trial, now we know, okay, well, we got this free trial. And when that trial buys, we would know that too. We can track all this stuff. So most of our traffic comes through word of mouth, and we can tell that because we know people search Badger Maps and then click through to our page through Google. So that's the most common search that leads to deals. That's usually word of mouth doing that, but we can also track all the content, right? And having all that content drives SEO that makes us a landing page for lots of stuff, right? It's really, really important. It's important because the way people find things is with the internet, and the way people interact with things is with the internet. And the internet respects content, and it's how Google's algorithm works. It doesn't matter if it makes sense or not. You're writing for the algorithm, and the algorithm watches how people click around, right? If you write a story about this element of sales management and it's ranking, and people are clicking on it and getting their answer there, and it's a good thing and it's meaningful to them, and they're not going back to Google, then Google understands this is an important resource. They found what they wanted here, and they put it up higher. And the algorithm is not dumb. Google's a very smart company, and they know what they're doing. And so it's the hardest but most important strategy of marketing, really. I mean, setting up Google Ads is easy, and you can pay someone to do it. A lot of the stuff is blocking and tackling. And this is blocking and tackling too. It's not rocket science or anything, but it's really important.
Well, I think worthy content that people revisit, right? And they go from one thing to another on your site, it costs money. You can't buy a $40 blog post and expect someone
No,
to want to
no.
consume it, right?
You got to invest the money, you got to invest the people. I mean, we're a small startup, right? We make $5.5 million a year. I've always had at least 3 people doing content stuff at
There
any
you go.
given time.
There you go.
And that's not to say you can't outsource it. There are a million firms that do a great job, and that may have been cheaper for me, frankly. But there's an insourcing and an outsourcing, discussion to be had here too. And maybe the best answer is a mix, as it often is. But bottom line, it's super important.
Awesome. We ran deep on some of these topics, so I want to try and pick one last one to land the episode on. And I really like this one where you said you like to talk about advice to a CEO of a company that he or she thinks they might want to sell their business in the next few years. And what do you recommend people do to position themselves to get the best valuation? And that's a pretty broad topic, right? But what are the things you would recommend someone focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I guess driving up the valuation, it encompasses everything because valuation is going to encompass everything. But, revenue and growth are the main drivers of valuation. So if you create a product that creates a lot of value for people, lots of people will pay you a lot of money for it. So those are the first 2 things you can do is drive revenue and growth. Now, assuming you're doing everything you can for those things already, another really important lever of valuation, and I guess this is half of the growth equation anyway, but is churn. But it's not just about driving growth by reducing your churn. Investors really look closely at your churn when they're trying to slap a valuation on a business. And there's a big difference between getting a 4x multiple and a 20x multiple, right? If you're making $1 million a year, it's the difference from 4 million and 20 million. So that determines a bit about
so
your
like revenue quality, right? That's like the sort of overarching topic, right? The quality of the revenue in the door, the quality of retaining it.
Yeah. Well, and part of that does get back to your marketing, right? Like that's one thing you can do to drive down churn is to be marketing to the right people who are the best fits for your product in the first place. And for us, it's always been field salespeople. And, that's why our content has been, I know you like to talk about content. Our content has been very focused on field salespeople. Like I have a podcast for field salespeople, Outside Sales Talk. And a lot of the content we've made is focused on topics that field salespeople are interested in about how to improve their performance, how to be successful in their jobs. That's been a lot of our content. But lots of people can use our product. Like we have a lot of field service people, but 60% of our revenue is probably field salespeople, and they're very sticky. They have lower churn, because we create a lot of value for them. And, if you're a field salesperson today, you're probably going to be one in 3 years, and you probably were one 3 years ago. So even though they switch companies a lot, they bring us with them. So that's bottom line. It's a great group for keeping churn down, and that drives the valuation up. Other things to think about is having really great customer service. And I think, especially if you have a product that is not just enterprise, but like individual consumers can use it, which a lot more software companies, with product-led growth, they do have a lot of just individuals able to sign up. If that's the case, customer service is really hard and really expensive. And probably 40% of our business is just single seat, single license, one salesperson coming and buying it for themselves for their personal usage. And they may be expensing it, they may be paying for it for themselves, but that's 40% of our business. It's really hard to service those people. And on a customer by customer basis, that they have a very low ACV, right? They're not worth that much. They're worth $500-600 a year, I guess $600 a year, $49 a month. But you need to give them an excellent customer service experience. And that's going to drive up your valuation by reducing churn and increasing low cost, other customers being acquired at low cost through word of mouth. So it drives down your CAC, down your churn, and drives up your revenue if you can really provide people with great service. I think one of my hacks for that has been to get a offshored customer service team and treat them very well. Buy them healthcare, and even when it's not standard, pay at the high end of the market, have a career path for them, like create a nice organization that they want to work at in a country that speaks solid English. And a lot of the interactions are going to be written, like it's IM, it's email. People hit in your product, I have a problem or I have a question. And, half the time they can't figure out how to do a password reset. I swear, when you look at these tickets, it's crazy. It's like, oh, let's learn how to reset passwords already. But, it's the same 10 problems that are pretty stupid that everyone has, right? But picking a country where it's inexpensive, somewhere where people are going to understand them. So there can be a strong accent because most of the interactions are written, but we do both phone and written through this, but we started out with just written. And really treat them well. And 90% of your customer problems, complaints, requests will go there and be answered and you can get them to answer them in 10 minutes. And people are really happy with that. Like, hey, I had a problem. I hit these guys up, and 24/7, we got the question answered, right? And that is a key way you can drive valuation. And if I were going to use one hack, that is the hack.
Nice. Hey, time for one last question. Looking back over the time you've had Badger Maps, what's the one thing you would do differently sitting where you are now based on the journey so far, and why?
Let's see, what would I have done differently? I mean, I think you give up a lot starting something like this, and going at it alone. It's definitely a challenge to build a business over the years. I think it's not a job, it's so much more. It really takes a lot more out of you. I think, it takes away your bandwidth to be a good friend, a good son, daughter, mother, father. It takes away your ability to be in shape, to participate in extracurriculars. And some people manage to pull some stuff off. But I think for most people, you're forgetting about any hobbies you thought was fun, and your time just becomes a real commodity. So you really have to focus in on, here are the things that I really care about and that I want to focus on, because you have to ruthlessly prioritize your time so that you can get those really high priority personal things done. You have to choose what those are very carefully. I certainly haven't always had the best work-life balance. That's probably what I would try to encourage myself to prioritize better and have a better work-life balance. But, that being said, I also think that if you're starting a company, it's not going to be a time where you're going to have a great work-life balance, so it's hard to get the train out of the station and get a company moving down the tracks. If work-life balance is one of your big priorities, then I'd find a cozy corner of a big company and have a 30-year career and do this the easy way. It's definitely easier. So
Yeah, I hear you. I've been entrepreneuring quite some time. The big company movie was a lot easier. So,
yeah.
So Steve, thanks so much. This was a really great, deep conversation. If people want to learn more about your company and reach out to you, how can they do that?
Yeah, if you need mapping and routing of a bunch of points in the map, whether they're customers or something else, definitely check out Badger Maps. Our website's the best place to learn about that. If you're looking for me, LinkedIn's probably the best place to find me. Just search for Steve Benson, Badger Maps. I'll pop right up. And if you want to hear more of my pontifications here, then check out my podcast called Outside Sales Talk.
That's awesome. Thanks so much. It was a great episode. And if people want to reach me, I'm on LinkedIn/n/Ken Lempit. My company website is austinlawrence.com. And if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do so wherever podcasts are distributed. Steve Benson, thanks so very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the SaaS Backwards Podcast, brought to you by Austin Lawrence Group. We're a growth marketing agency that helps SaaS firms reduce churn, accelerate sales, and generate demand. Learn more about us at www.austinlawrence.com. You can email Ken Lempit at kl@austinlawrence.com about any SaaS marketing or customer retention subject. We hope you'll subscribe, and thanks again for listening.